Welcome to another episode of Exploring Prosperity. Today's conversation is about education, one of the most important forces shaping America's future. For years, surveys have shown rising pessimism about our schools. Confidence in K-12 education is at a record low, and student performance, especially among the lowest performing students, has declined sharply across reading, math, and science. These trends matter. As Ray Dalio has often pointed out, a country's strength depends on the strength of its education system. In Principles of Dealing with a Changing World Order, he wrote, "The greatest determinant of a nation's future is the quality of its education." But Dalio warns that while education has long been one of America's competitive advantages, its recent deterioration poses a serious risk for our long-term prosperity. And yet, innovation is happening. Some schools are proving what's possible when you align teachers, administrators, parents, and graduates around a clear mission and give them the freedom to act on it. Independent schools in particular have the agility and the clarity to design programs that genuinely prepare students for adulthood. In this episode, I'm speaking with Meera Viswanathan, head of school at the Ethel School, where that mission-driven approach is producing remarkable results. You're about to hear what real educational innovation looks like. And now, on to the show. Meera, great to see you.
Wonderful to see you, Bob.
Education is an American institution that was a great source of pride and optimism in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But over the last decade, it's become a larger source of pessimism about the next generation, from declining rankings of public schools and a serious erosion in trust in America's university system. But that narrative overshadows how flexible, responsive, and innovative parts of the education system have become. Today, I'm honored to be joined by one of the leaders of the cutting edge of that work, Dr. Meera Viswanathan, head of school at Ethel Walkers. Under her leadership, Walkers has become a laboratory for new approaches to high school education and a model for what thoughtful innovation can look like. Together, we're going to step back and look at the purpose of education, the pressures it faces, and great ideas now being put into action that show us what's possible. Thank you so much for joining me, Meera. When you think about Walkers today, what do you see as the core mission of the school, and how has that evolved in the years that you've been there?
Thank you, Bob. It's a delight to be here. This is my 10th year, my 10-year tenure at the Ethel Walker School. And the function of what we're doing, I think, is common to all educational institutions in a way, which is that the very word education means to lead out. And that is to go from the known to the unknown in a guided fashion. And I think that's what every school, every college purports to do. Ethel Walker Smith, when she founded the school, had a vision not of a preparatory kind of finishing school for girls, but rather a college preparatory school that would allow girls to have the most rigorous education and permit them to enter the most advanced institutions in this country so that they could lead independent, useful, purposeful lives. And I would say that mission still exists. I am a relatively recent convert to single-sex education, and I should explain that it happened because while I was a professor for decades at a university, I discovered that I could tell which of my female students, just by observing them for a week, had gone to an all-girls school or had been homeschooled on the one hand, and those who had gone to a co-ed institution. And if you were to ask me what were the three qualities that distinguished those young women, I would say first, they never apologized before they spoke. 2, they persisted in discussion and argument. And 3, they were comfortable in their skin. And this amazed me because I don't think I was comfortable in my own skin until I was 50 years old. And I began to think, I wonder what that process of coeducation did for me, particularly in those formative years from about 13 to 18. And when I got to the Ethel Walker School, I began to understand what such a school allowed. And it's not necessarily a kinder, gentler place. I think it is kind. I think it is warm and cozy. But what it really allows is for girls to do more advanced work. And developmentally, boys and girls are different. And even if we think of gender, and I know this is a very controversial subject, as a spectrum, I think that nevertheless we see the poles on either end, which are definitive in particular ways developmentally. And so it's for that reason, I think that for these adolescents from about 12 or 13 to 18, that there's a real benefit for many students to attend a single-sex school.
And I attended Deerfield, and it was very similar. It was funny when I was interviewed. I told the admissions director that I would never attend an all-male school, and he said, "Well, why would that be?" And I said, "Why do I have to explain that?"
Exactly.
And he said, "Do you really hang around with girls at home doing your homework during the week?" Like, no, because on the weekends they come. They do.
Yeah. Exactly.
But it's a different experience when you're able to explore the world with peers without the distractions
That's exactly
of
right.
the other sex.
That's right.
And how about what were some of the things that you saw as the objectives that you needed to set, and
Right.
how did it evolve? How did your thinking evolve when you took over this job?
That's right. One of the things I began to recognize is that girls by the age of 12 or 13 have already achieved a particular level that allows them to do more advanced work. And what we see often in secondary education.
This show is being brought to you by our sponsor, Trueflation. Professional investors and economists and probably any casual observers know that government inflation statistics are only an approximation of what real inflation is. Not only that, but the government has a conflict of interest because high inflation can be so damaging to the economy, the deficit, and our $36 trillion in debt. Trueflation collects over 80 million pricing data points. Most are updated daily to reveal inflation with precision for asset managers, governments, companies, and the general public. Check them out at trueflation.com.
There's a great deal of busy work. And the function of this busy work, as Mr. Boyden at the famed headmaster at Deerfield used to say, is keep those boys busy. And we know that hormonally boys are experiencing this tumult within. And we often, I think, wrongly label them as transgressive or bad because they're unable to sit in their seats. They're unable to pay attention. They're unable to focus. They're not bad. This is simply where they are. And the function of busy work is to help them be occupied while they experience this tumult and mature into themselves. Now, the difficulty of the busy work is that girls by the age of 12 or 13 are ready to do the work, and instead they're engulfed by mountains of busy work, which they, having understood the value of education, do. And of course, they realize it's busy work, and that renders them, I think, a kind of cynicism about this. So instead, what I think in all girls' schools recognize those, again, there are several qualities. One is what we might call reciprocity, which is so important. The ability to listen and to respond to someone else's comment. It's like a tennis game. No one wants to see simply a series of aces, as spectacular as that is, because that's not a game. What you want is the back and forth, the rallying in interesting ways. And that is necessary for higher level learning. Similarly, obviously, we need to make sure that people are ready to listen and to sit and to be able to follow directions, and girls have mastered that. But the last quality is something which Stanford University psychologists used to call the marshmallow test. And this was a test administered to first graders. And what you say to first graders is, you can have one marshmallow immediately, or if you can wait 15 minutes, I'll give you two. And not surprisingly, no first grader can wait 15 minutes for double the reward because it's just too long to defer immediate gratification. And what most girls have learned by about 13 is, yes, I know how to defer that immediate gratification because there are later greater rewards waiting me. And those three qualities, I think, are very, very helpful in being able to attend a higher level learning. And so what we're able to do is to plunge immediately and I think shed a great deal of that busy work, which is not to say that there's some work that isn't tedious, that it's involved in learning. There's some memorization invariably. And memorization need not be tedious, but it's regarded as, mere rote learning. The truth is cultivation of good memory is helpful, even in an age of AI.
We're proud to be sponsored by Foundation. They've created Passport, one of the top-rated Bitcoin hardware wallets, proudly made in the USA. It's fully open source and air-gapped, meaning your Bitcoin stays completely offline and secure. The shocking Bybit exchange hack shows why holding some Bitcoin offline diversifies risk. Now they're launching Passport Prime, your all-in-one solution for not only Bitcoin, but all passwords and 2FA security. Head to foundation.xyz to secure your digital future.
And so we want to make sure that our students are ready. And if you were to ask me, I think going back to your original question, Bob, about what we intend to do, the world is changing so rapidly, as we all know. We are not preparing our students for the world of today, because that will not be the world in 4 years for the seniors when they graduate from college, or for 8 years if they come in at a younger age. And so what we have to think about is, what are the qualities, what are the beings and doings that our students need to have to navigate this rapidly altered world? And I would say that the qualities come down to just a few things. Of course, all education is about qualitative verbal learning. It's about quantitative skills. It's about analysis. It's about understanding human nature, those sorts of things. But more than that, it's the ability to be an autodidact. That is, to teach yourself what you want to learn. In truth, 80% in life of what we learn, what we need, is something we've taught ourselves. But the function of schools and teachers is to provide that initial guidance to those pathways, and even more importantly, to excite us about the prospect of learning. And in order to defer immediate gratification, you have to feel that the struggle is worth it. And those teachers that turn the light bulb on are messengers from above, I think. And so I like to populate my school with what I call Pied Pipers, those magical teachers that are so interesting. And there are different styles of charisma personified by these teachers. Some are quiet, some are very, full of dry humor, some are flamboyant, some are thrilling, some are poignant. They have different modes. But the key is to find teachers who are wonderfully competent in their subject, who have a passion for teaching and students, and finally, who know how to get that light bulb to go on.
It seems that last component of learning how to learn becomes ever more important as the world speeds up. And it's it puts a greater premium on having the flexibility to adjust a program. And it sounds like if you have set that as the objective, the program actually doesn't have to change very much. Mm-hmm. You just want to make sure that all the teachers are on board and that there's a time and a place for each step and stage of this. If you needed to retool the faculty over the last 8 years, 10 years?
Mm-hmm. I think they've retooled me as much as I've retooled them, honestly. But I think we are evolving to a place. I think that girls learning, the Nobel economist philosopher Amartya Sen defined human justice as the ability of an individual to be able to fulfill their full potential of beings and doings. And it didn't guarantee success in those ventures, but it argued that justice was their ability to pursue those ends. And that became the United Nations Human Development Fund definition of justice. And it's largely used in the third world. But it struck me that it was very helpful for our school to think about girls. And so what we've worked on, and this was really the topic of our E.E. Ford grant that allowed us to pursue the capabilities approach, which is Amartya Sen's coinage, which is the idea that girls need to have every avenue open to them, And then it's up to them to choose which doors to go through and pursue. But we have to make sure that we disrupt some gendered mindsets up front, because otherwise they will go through the conventional doorways, as we all will. And so that's what the Capabilities Approach program at Walker's is all about.
Tell us more. This gets to the innovations. This gets to the definition of the mission and how it can spawn innovations and developments and improving the educational outcomes.
I'm seeing some exciting things happen at our school. So what we have recognized at Walker's is, and we hear anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists speak of the so-called confidence gap for girls. Because we know, and educators will attest, that girls outperform boys in the secondary classroom, hands down. And they win all the gold stars. But then, when we translate to college and beyond, we discover that the classroom doesn't sort of mirror what the boardroom looks like. And so the question has remained, why is it girls who are doing so well academically suddenly are not the ones outside the classroom to be able to lead, to create, to do things other than within the confines of classroom? And of course, I'm exaggerating. Of course, many women do, many girls do. But there is a pronounced tendency in that direction. And psychologists have called this the confidence gap. That many girls, when the rules are lifted, don't know what they should do and worry about judgment, shame, public humiliation, as I well did when I was a student. And so it keeps them within the confines. They color within the outlines, largely, at least, as I say, that was my experience. So part of what we're doing is to give girls exposure to areas, many of which they haven't experienced before, but also to give them the confidence that they are capable. And so we have defined 10 skill areas, a kind of constellation, and they fall into 3 categories: the physical, which we call agencies, the intellectual, which we call fluencies, and then the experiential, which are discoveries. And it's really to develop metrics for fundamental mastery, not 100%. And we often find girls embroidering on their grades. They might have gotten a 95, but my gosh, they're going to get a 99 next time. And the question is that the best use of time? What might they be doing with their skills and knowledge other than just working for a grade? And so in capabilities, the agencies include certification in areas like swimming. Every girl at Walker's is Red Cross certified swimming. Every girl passes the Red Cross CPR first aid test. Every girl has a self-defense course before she goes to college. And this is, again, to sort of reassure her that, yes, she is capable in those physical areas. The second, of course, is the fluencies, and here we have 3. We have rhetorical, digital, and financial. And rhetorical is the ability to give public addresses before hundreds of people, knowing how to deal with a crowd, to construct a speech, to be able to use a microphone and be compelling. And that's really the function of rhetoric, which is to persuade. And this is a skill that everyone needs for the rest of their lives. The second is digital. And we began, as I said, 9 years ago, and coding was very important as a skill. And so every girl within capabilities learns to code well enough to solve problems. Now, of course, nowadays, Jack Ma, I think, said this a few years ago, the head of Alibaba, that coding was going to be taken care of. And indeed, we see with AI that coding is not what it was once. But in fact, coding teaches us something very important. It teaches us algorithmic thinking, which is what is it to move step by step, logically, rationally, to go from point A to point B. And I think that that's terrific and that we need to keep doing it. Also, it's helpful as even when you have devices that can calculate for you, to be able to do the calculations manually. And I think coding is not unlike that. And perhaps what we've achieved, I think most successfully, is our financial fluencies. And as a middle-aged woman who never had exposure to this area, and who as a professor saw many of her econ majors who were female having no exposure to investment, I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful for our girls to know about things in the real world like taxes and investments. And so, starting again 9 years ago, we, through the auspices of the United Way working with the IRS, our students took the tax exam for that year, and that first year, 12 of them, I believe, were certified as legal tax preparers. And Bob, I will tell you that you have not lived until you've seen a 16-year-old female tax professional at work. It is a mighty sight. And now, thanks to the capabilities approach, every junior at our school takes the exam and passes. Now, part of the reason for this, of course, is that many of them work from January to April in Hartford, helping lower-income families claim their guaranteed income tax credits and refunds. And in the 6 years since we couldn't work in the COVID years, in the 6 years that our students have done this, working 2 hours a day on Sundays from late January until mid-April, they've brought back over $1 million in those refunds to local families.
It's just remarkable.
It's a wonderful, wonderful accomplishment. And to me, the definition of real community partnership in which both sides benefit and begin an engagement that teaches them about the world they live in.
It brings new meaning to the term community service.
Well, and that's why we labeled our community service program Community Partnership, because community service reeks a little bit of noblesse oblige.
Yes.
And it implies that only one side is the beneficiary. Our students benefit not just from tax information and knowledge and the gratification of passing the exam. They also learn about anthropology in real-life ways, which is what does it mean to have a limited income and to have to make very painful choices among things like rent, transportation, health care, food. And what if you could only fund 3 of the 4 in a particular month? What do you do? And I think those important ethical choices help us understand one another as human beings and allow for greater sympathy and understanding for those who might be in situations unlike the ones we find ourselves in. So that's been very exciting to see. And then we started 3 years ago our investment program. And I thought, wouldn't it be terrific to see what girls can do as investors? And most of our girls had never heard of bull and bear markets when we started. And so we began from basics, and we started with a group of seniors, thanks to the generosity of a grandparent who heard me talk about my fantasy of giving every senior a seminar on investments and $1,000 to invest and sort of learn to track their stock. And I remember after one Grandparents' Day, a grandparent came up to me and said, well, so how many? And I thought, how many what? And he said, how many seniors? And I said, well, about 50. He said, okay, I'm writing you a check today for $50,000. I want you to start the program. It's May now. I want you to start it in September. And so we did. And it was a fantastic pilot where the students became highly engaged, learned what it was to track a stock, to pick a stock or a fund or a bond. And at the spring meeting where everyone liquidated, they of course had to pay taxes on their earnings, and they beat the market. It was lovely as an aggregate. We asked them, what advice, what was your experience, and what advice would you give us to revamp the program? And I was struck by what they said. They said, first of all, you talk about diversified portfolios. How can we even think about diversified portfolios if we only have one chance to pick something, and we can't think about, what is going to happen? We should have the opportunity to buy and sell. And they said, second, it seems ridiculous that you tell us that stocks are not a quick sort of way to make money, but you really need to stay in the market for some period of time. Why are you only giving us 9 months?
Trading versus investing.
Exactly. And so they said, really, you need to start this earlier. And so we did. We now start in the 10th grade with a seminar, and then the students in the 10th grade pick their stocks, and then they get to watch it for the next couple of years. And this year we have an option where we're going to give them midway through a chance to buy and sell, and if they choose to. And the last thing they said is, we're so excited about this. Won't you teach us, because of course they were mostly under 18, so we had to hold their accounts. Won't you teach us how to set up accounts ourselves so we can continue to invest? And that was thrilling to watch. And so we did. Now what we're seeing is the opportunity to take that even further. And I might add that with the VITA tax program, there's a basic tax exam that allows you to help another person with their taxes. There's an advanced exam that helps you with more complicated tax returns. And now we're seeing not only our seniors, but many of our juniors take the advanced exam as well. Similarly with investments, I think many of our students want to pursue it still further. And we want to make sure that when students want to learn, we are ready to be able to lead them out, to educate them.
There are so many stories of successful investors who said, I got the bug when I was 6 years old, and I bought my first stock when I was 10.
Right.
And so I imagine there's also quite a community conversation piece when everybody has a stock and you can't wait to tell somebody what's happening with it.
Well, that's exactly right. And we have some extraordinary achievements among our students. And the conversations range from sometimes a kind of absurd poignancy to a kind of brilliance about how they decided what they were going to do. And my goal is, what's next? And I guess that's what I always ask as a head of school. What's next? What do I need to do to give them more opportunities? And again, for example, we started with $50,000, which funds one class. But then when we moved it back to the sophomore year, we had a dilemma, because there would be 3 classes investing, and so that required another $100,000, no small amount. And that was where our wonderful board of trustees stepped in, and they looked at what we'd done, the success, and they said, you can go ahead and take $100,000 from the endowment and use it for this purpose. And of course, what happens at the end of the year is, after we liquidate everyone's purchases, we then take the money and put it back in the fund for next year. So
the principal always remains the same
precisely.
amount. And then what happens with the profits?
Well, the profits get divided. In the first year, we divided into 3. A third went to a charity that the students, as an aggregate, picked. A third went to the school as their senior class gift. And then a third was distributed among the students who had done exceptionally well, and the teams of students who had done well. And so that was terrific. But I might add that now we are, I think, perhaps the only school in the country, independent school, that can say that our students manage a portion of our endowment, albeit a very small portion.
Oh, that's good. That's
yeah.
good marketing spot right there. So how have you seen the benefits unfold? You must have stories of the college classes and the graduates from college now, because the first graduates from Ethel Walker's who had these programs are now out. What are the reports that you hear back?
Well, I had a very interesting experience a couple of years ago. We were at a reception in Florida, and a young woman came up and said, I'd like to speak. And she told the assembled group that when she graduated, she loved her time at Walker's. She, in fact, had passed the VITA exam and had been working with families. And she went off to college. She majored in business. She did well. She had a high GPA. But she said when she went for her first job interview, the interviewer was really not interested in what she majored in, what her GPA, or even where she'd gone to college. The one thing he wanted to talk about was, how did you get certified at the age of 16 to be a legal tax preparer and work with individuals and families? And she explained to him her high school and what we had done, and he was so impressed by that. He said, that's why I'm going to hire you. And so she wanted us to know that this continues to be a source of great strength, not only in terms of public recognition of what students do, but in their own self-confidence, going back to that confidence gap. And that's what all of these are about, to teach our students that they can learn just about anything they want to learn. They can become true autodidacts. And so our girls are fearless. And I'm hearing as they go off to college, there's no subject that intimidates them. There's no discussion they don't want to be a part of.
Yeah, it's hard to measure this, but it gets back to your original thinking about what is it that we're really trying to do, and it's this confidence
level. And so these are two tangible programs, really. And it allows people to know that they've accomplished a specific thing.
That's exactly right.
That probably isn't very hard to do. I mean, probably isn't very easy to pass. These tests must take a lot of time.
They do take a lot of time, and the beauty part is, and again, this is what I think is most important, and there's a scalability question here, which is that every student at our school passes, not just those who self-select, not just those who have exposure to finance, not just those who think they're going to major in it, but every student. And I think that's where we underestimate students and the power of education. We imagine that certain people are innately endowed with talents and only they can succeed, and everyone else simply sort of wallows. I think that's not true at all. I don't think we know what the upper limits for any student can be. And part of our challenge as educators is not to put a ceiling on them and to keep imagining possibilities. What we know now is that students learn in different ways, and that there are different kinds of learning challenges which don't reflect intelligence, but do reflect particular needs and supports. And so if we can do that, and students can achieve and can become autodidacts, how much better a society will be. And of course, as John Dewey, the famed American philosopher educator, once commented, solid education is critical for democracies. And if we believe in democratic principles, we will want as rich and varied an educational environment as we possibly can have. And that's why I think it's not that I feel every school should be a single-sex school. I think different students thrive in different arenas. So we want public, we want parochial, we want independent, we want all girls, we want all boys, we want different combinations so students and families can select which of those environments will produce what Aristotle used to call eudaimonia, which is the goal of human existence, which is flourishing or well-being. And that's what we're after.
The effectiveness of this innovation, it's part of the reason I wanted to do this is because I want people to understand the power of these new ideas. How easy is it, or how many other schools have come to know it and seek advice on implementing it, and how can the message get out better?
Well, Bob, thank you so much. This is my keen preoccupation right now, which is scalability. It's wonderful that we as a school are doing this, and it's terrific for our students and alums. But education, by its very nature, is not a zero-sum game. It's not a pie in which one person wins and one person loses. It's much more the biblical fish and loaves. It is generative in its very nature, that more generates more. No one has to unlearn or fail for someone to learn. In fact, when someone learns, it usually trickles down to others as well. So this generative aspect is a magical aspect. It's kind of like the golden goose that we should be availing ourselves of. So when we applied originally for the E.E. Ford grant, it was built in that we would think about scalability, and E.E. Ford loved the idea and encouraged us when we finished this grant to go ahead and apply for a next grant to help us make it scalable. We had a little bit of a chance 2 years ago, or I guess a year and a half ago. One of our alums who lives in Poughkeepsie contacted the city of Poughkeepsie School, which is a public school, struggling with some typical urban issues that we see schools struggling with, and said, you really should hear about what my old school is doing. And there were a couple of administrators who were interested, but the faculty were a little bit, I think, taken aback and thought, well, what is this, elite girls' school up in Simsbury? What do they think they're going to teach us? And which I appreciate, by the way, their sentiment. And we dispatched our executive director and 2 students. And very wisely, he let the students lead. And by the end of the session, in which there was a room full of teachers and administrators, everybody wanted to go forward, not only with VITA, but with all of the capabilities approach. And so that's what's exciting to me. We need probably some more resources. We're a small school, and it's enough for us to just keep our girls going. But it would thrill me to work on a project to take this to public schools, to take this to parochial schools, to other independent schools.
Any interested school.
Any interested school. And, there are a few schools that have done a little bit on VITA. I remember there was a letter to the New York Times about 5 years ago, I think, where a student talked about passing the VITA exam and working with families, and it made the New York Times. And then I think 2 years ago, one of the writers in the New York Times talked about a school in California, a public school, where 3 or 4 students, and this was not a well-funded school, 3 or 4 students had passed the VITA exam and were doing it, and this was seen as wonderfully enterprising, which it was. But then I think to myself, well, we have a whole school full. What we're demonstrating is that everyone can do this. And I say that, and I mean it. Everyone can do this. Yeah. And so why wouldn't we? So that's where I'm working right now, is to look how we can. I've put some feelers out to Hartford, the local community. I've talked to the Board of Selectmen in Simsbury, and I'm eager for any and all. And for us to think about how people can adapt. The goal is not to transplant Ethel Walker into another school. It's to take the program we've developed and to be able to adapt it to that particular school's values, culture, and population.
Even just to show the example of innovation so that other schools can think outside the box and come up with other ideas that might work.
And by the way, it's not that public schools aren't innovative and their people aren't terrifically creative. It's the fact that public schools are hampered by so much legislation that they really have very little room to move in. And I think that's the great pity, which is how do we give public schools, which is why charter schools have succeeded, how do we give public schools the ability to be able to make decisions, to be able to innovate? And I'm the product of a fine public education from Los Angeles, California, when California public education was the envy of the world. And it's when we began to defund public education. And I think whether or not one has children, we should always say yes to taxes for schools. And the reason is because that has a direct impact on the quality of each and every life inhabiting that city. And when children are well educated, when they're fully engaged and occupied, when there are faculty members who are committed and really desirous of leading those students out again, then you'll have a thriving eudaimonia. You will have flourishing.
Well, I suppose one of the interesting differences between public education and a privately motivated and funded school, the private school is able to shift the mission. You're able to play with the core and move it around. And public education's core is generally set by legislatures in the state, and that there is flexibility around the edges. And so that can certainly provide innovation and great programs around the edge. But it is an advantage and that's one thing that people should take into consideration when they're looking at different types of schools, is the flexibility of a school to be able to implement changes.
That's exactly right. And to give schools and communities some autonomy in how there may be particular goals that you want to be realized, but schools should have autonomy about how they achieve those goals. Mm-hmm. And again, that is suitable for their environment, their population. One of the things that I decry, honestly, is that over the last 40 years, since the glory days of the 70s, when I came of age, is the increasing emphasis on the instrumental utility of education. That is, what we saw in earlier decades was the opportunity for what used to be called a liberal arts education. And that had nothing to do with political bias. It had nothing to do with humanities versus the sciences. In fact, it's based on the old classical model of the trivium and the quadrivium, which were these subjects ranging from mathematics to rhetoric that everyone should study. And you studied them not because it was going to get you a job, but for its own sake. And again, to quote John Dewey, education is not preparation for life. It is life itself. And that's what we have to remember. The reality is that if you pursue that, you will be able to be employed. You will find jobs. But it's in fact much more than just finding a job.
It's not the goal, it's not the objective.
That's right. It's what we really do with a liberal arts education is create a blueprint for life. It's about ethical values. And we're seeing now we talked earlier about the wonderful E.E. Ford funded piece on civil discourse that John Austin at Deerfield, working with others, has assembled, which is so helpful, which emphasizes, again, civility, civil discourse. And that notion that there's a way we comport ourselves where we are respectful to others, where we listen, where we debate, is critical. I think that people sometimes get distracted and suddenly, people throw free speech around. And there was a very interesting book written in 1994 by the literary and legal scholar Stanley Fish, which was, the title was, There's No Such Thing as Free Speech, and That's a Good Thing. And of course it was very controversial. But his point was that people bandy the word free speech about, but when you look carefully, invariably there's a caveat. So for example, John Milton's famous screed, Areopagitica, which is the great freedom of the press that we all cite, and very few people read, but everybody cites it, about why it's so important to have a free press and why free speech is important. Well, Milton was a Puritan. And if you look very carefully in Areopagitica, it says, yes, everyone should have a voice, everyone, except, of course, those egregious papists, right? And so it was the notion of the Catholics that really got his ire, and he felt everyone else deserved a voice. And invariably we find whenever should pedophiles have free speech? Should Nazis have free speech? And invariably you can say, you keep probing, and everyone has a point where they say, well, no, not that group. So that was Stanley Fish's point, which is it's always within limits. There is no such thing as absolute free speech, because we don't live in absolutes. We live in time and place and with particular cultural values. And where we are is not where the founding fathers were, which is not where Thomas Aquinas was not where others. So each era has to help define what allows us, not so much emphasizing free speech, according to Fish, but freedom of inquiry. That's what education is about, freedom of inquiry. And I think if we can not sort of run for the wagons and circle them, and instead think about what is it that helps us to be open to different perspectives and debate them and think about them thoughtfully without immediately condemning others. That is exciting. The goal of education is not teaching children what to think, it's teaching them how to think.
Exactly. You bridge this important period of elementary school and then the university system. Are there things? Tell me about the preparation of the girls that apply and come to Ethel Walker's. Has there been any change over the last 8 years about what it is that how they were acclimated coming in, and has that made you adjust anything?
Yeah, I think there are two milestone events that have happened, actually in the last, I would say, 15 years that have changed everything. The most recent, of course, was COVID. And COVID, both as a kind of cultural shared angst, left a kind of scarring, I think, on students. More particularly, it had an impact developmentally on children who were at various stages. So in terms of socialization, in terms of mathematics, in terms of learning to think, in terms of that give and take reciprocity I talked about, we see the impact. And just in the last year or two that we have students that have had an entirely COVID-free high school experience, and the difference is palpable in many ways. So COVID, I think, left a scar that I think a generation will continue to experience in various ways. And it's because it's very difficult to catch up in all of those missed developmental areas, which are very subtle. So that, I think, changed the population. The second thing was, and Jonathan Haidt is very articulate about this, which is the impact of social media and the ubiquity of cell phones on adolescents, particularly on girls. And we think about 2008, which is the date he picks, thinking about places like Facebook and Instagram and all of that, where we see a greater fragility in terms of mental health, greater self-doubt of adolescents, a greater sense of hopelessness, precisely what impelled you, Bob, to start this wonderful podcast series, which is education is always hopeful. No one is ever doomed. If you are an authentic educator, you have to believe that there is progress, that there is learning, that this is going to engender a better state of affairs. And yet for our students, there's a darkness that we haven't seen. So those two things, and then I would say the impact of a world where there's so many other factors, economic uncertainty, geopolitical shiftings in the world, the chasm dividing our country socially and politically, the issue of whether our democracy can endure, environmental changes. All of these things, I think, produce a sense of anxiety and nervousness in students. And finally, I would say, most recently, of course, AI, which it's naive, I think, to debate whether AI is a good thing or a bad thing, as if we had control about AI. It's already embedded in everything we do.
That's right.
The key is to understand what is it AI offers us, where is it utilized, and what are the gaps? What is it based on? And it's not an instrument of accuracy or truth. It's an instrument of plausibility, likelihood, frequency. And so to recognize that, to realize how it's generated, how we can utilize it, but also what the limits are. And the area that I find most disturbing, honestly, when I look at students now, and I think of students 20 years ago or 30 years ago, is that students are just as wonderfully dear, enthusiastic, ready for challenges. They are intelligent, all of those good things. What they lack, however, is imagination. And I'm finding that our world has produced, with its many, many algorithms, I think of, those contour TV ads a few years ago, where it would only give you what you wanted. How is it we only can continue in what we already know? And this confirmation bias approach to the world, where I know what I know and no one is going to change me and I want more of it and everyone should think the way I do.
Or even if you don't want more of it, it's coming to you anyway.
It's coming to you anyway, exactly. But that narrowing of the world, and I like to joke that it reminds me of the giant sandworms of Xenakis in the book and the film Dune, where if you take 3 steps in a straight line, that sandworm is going to gobble you up. And so the way around the sandworm is this erratic, irregular dance, this sort of hopping dance motion that zigzags. And it's that embrace of the random, of the quirky, of the unexpected. That is what I think education should do now, because what is given to us in search engines and AI programs, platforms, is algorithms that guide us toward what we think we want. And in
they
fact,
can be used as a crutch or they can be used as a tool.
And they should be
they're 2 different things.
And to say that they can be a crutch doesn't mean to damn them. It means how can we use them well as a crutch without becoming so overly reliant that we lose our capacity to think. And so the power of imagination, I think, is absolutely critical. I remember reading a couple of years ago about these headsets that are being pioneered in China, where teachers can monitor the brain waves of students and can tell when students daydream so they can reprimand them. And I thought, good God. First of all, I would never have survived kindergarten or first grade, much less beyond. But second of all, but most of all, daydreaming is a phenomenally important intellectual activity. I think, of course, there are times we need students to pay attention, but the capacity to daydream is the capacity to imagine. And we need to cultivate that. And so I think what I'm seeing increasingly is students who want to know, what's on the exam? What do I need to do? Who gamify everything. This is what I want to happen, and this is the best way to get to it. And I find that such a transactional approach to the world. It's really a kind of impoverishment of human experience. We want the opposite. We want to teach our students how to furnish their minds well. This is going to be their companion for life. It cannot be the place that says, I'm going to keep doom scrolling.
Yeah,
I'm going to keep playing
games. Here's what you need to do in the next 5 minutes in order to accomplish this particular goal.
And psychologists have talked about the fact that children are rarely bored now. They rarely have free time. There's no sense of, I'm writing an essay on the fallow. The fallow is what we use to describe fields that farmers purposely don't plant. They might seed it with a cover crop, like a clover, and that helps enrich the soils for the next year. But sometimes you just want it to be. And similarly with young minds, sometimes we want to give them space just to do nothing, to feel bored, because it's in those moments of boredom or daydreaming that ideas can emerge. If you preclude the idea of ideas emerging with preset ideas, I see this again as a kind of decline, and that makes me pessimistic. So part of what we need to do as teachers is surprise our students, is to offer them incongruous, Aristotle talked about thinking about the impossible improbabilities. And I think, it's the old physics problem of what happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object. It's a conundrum. I think Zen koans are the same way. They're for us to sort of get our minds clear to be able to focus on things. But again, that requires idle time. And I think that I often, for my classes, both in university, but at secondary schools that I've taught at, focus on thought experiments, thought exercises as homework. And students are always amazed. That's what homework is? You don't want me to turn anything in? No, I just want you to take an hour and think about this problem and work it out in your head. And that, I think, is so valuable for students. So reading and thinking are the two areas I've seen in decline. And of course, quantitative skills. And this notion that girls can't do quantitative things, I think is a peculiarly American cultural phobia. We don't see it in other parts of the world. And my hope is to extirpate it at Walker's and elsewhere.
This is a question that's outside of your purview, but you sit in a unique position to have an opinion about it. Your latest career is in innovation in this period of time that kids are in high school. Mm-hmm. The university system, you came from Brown, you were there for a very long time.
33 years.
And tell me about what you think of the condition of the U.S. university system. What are the problems? Can they be fixed?
Yeah.
What would you do if you could?
Well, I'm going to digress for just a minute, Bob, and wax poetic. And I'm going to wax poetic about patriotism. And I'm an immigrant to this child and a naturalized citizen. And the two qualities I have noted in my life that distinguish this country from every other country in the world that no one ever talks about when they talk about patriotism are the features of financial aid in education and public libraries that are truly free. And other countries have what they call public libraries, but they're few and far between. They're largely filled only with middle-class students cramming for exams. They are not the places I encountered as an immigrant child in Los Angeles, where you'd walk in and there would be a children's section, adult section. The children's librarian was there to help you, to ask you what you were interested in, to show you books that you might enjoy that were appropriate to your level. And then when you returned those books, to then say, what did you think of them? And to have that discussion. And my mother took my sister and me every week. When we turned 6, we got our ritual library cards, which was very exciting. And every week on Saturday, we would walk to the public library a few blocks away. We would each check out 10 books, which was the maximum allowed. We would take them home, read our 10 books, and then come back the next Saturday. And that was just a feature of my childhood growing up. I would say a great deal of my education happened in the public library. And so that is a tremendous asset. And there is not a town in this country, it doesn't matter how remote, you will see that probably the nicest, most distinguished building is the public library. It could be stone, it could be brick, it could be wood, it could be adobe, but it is a place that is hallowed. And then we saw in the last 5 decades, public libraries embrace audio, visual possibilities. We saw them have gardening equipment, photography, and again,
Snack bars.
the trust where all you have to do is have an address and show your card, and you can check these things out. That's extraordinary, and that's America. That trust, it's about democracy, that everybody has the ability, and everybody should be given a chance. And that, to me, it wells up in me. I feel so proud. I moved to tears thinking about it. The second thing is financial aid for education. And the idea, again, other countries don't really have it. And there's a nobility in recognizing that those who have potential should be given a chance. It doesn't mean any kind of guarantee about anything, but it means a chance to move forward. Doesn't necessarily mean that every institution has every opportunity for every student. But in the United States, if a student wants to pursue greater learning, whether it's professional, whether it's liberal arts, they can. Think about our marvelous community college system in this country. No other country has that. Think about the opportunities to move from a community or a junior college to a 4-year college. I think that is a remarkable thing. I will say, I think the country made a mistake a few decades ago when they began to deride vocational education and say, well, everybody should go to college, everybody. And the reality is, first of all, everybody shouldn't necessarily go to college unless they want to. And it shouldn't be a prerequisite to having a good job. And we need skilled tradespeople. And the trades are suffering. Plumbers are, few and far between. We should do what Europe does, which is rather than deride, quote, vocational education as lesser or somehow beneath, we should call our vocational schools polytechnics, because that's what they are. And those polytechnical institutions are incredibly valuable. The people who work and study in them do great things for society and deserve to be recognized for their skills and their accomplishments and their utility. And so that's what I would like to see if we could transform education. But thinking about higher ed now, going back to your question, I think, first of all, the United States has many more institutions of higher learning per capita than any place in the world. That is terrific. It's a very strong network. The greatest research, the greatest opportunities are afforded through American education. It's our greatest export product. Ironically, in the last years, we've done everything we can to negate the value and the opportunities that the United States has in higher education. I mean, every country wanted to send their most accomplished students to this country because they knew this was the greatest education around. And why do we want to belittle or destroy this great, asset is beyond me. I think we will withstand the onslaught because I think academics are committed. However, the impact is incalculable, particularly in the area of science. I will say that you can take away funding from NSF and NIH, and you will destroy labs you already have, right and left. What happens to those researchers? One of two things. They will either A, go elsewhere, and other countries are courting our best students, or they will go to other fields. And that is a loss. So to rebuild the science fabric, and let's face it, when did science really take off? It took off in two major events in the 20th century. One, it was a result of the need to find a weapon of mass destruction that could combat our enemies in World War II. And of course, we have the Manhattan Project, all of that, and we've had films recently about it. And of course, the advent of many Jewish scientists and others from Europe as refugees aided that effort. And that helped lift up American science. But the second, of course, was Sputnik, and what happened in the 50s with the Soviet space program, and the desire for Americans to say, well, we can do this, we're Americans. I wish we could have another such, not catastrophic incentivizer, but if we could realize that we should honor educators and education. We should rebuild. Now, has education become very, very politicized? It has. And it's an interesting turn. And I think there are ways that many institutions, I will say that despite people saying to me, why is it all of you in universities believe the same thing? I would say there was no more squabbly a bunch than educators at a university. We don't agree on anything.
No, I think you can't paint everything with one brush.
Right, and the reality is there is lively debate going on campus. And I would say that's true on most college campuses. So the recent events, and I think it was a very sad event, the congressional hearings with college presidents, because I don't think the college presidents represented their positions very well, and I think their preparation was weak. But I'm here to tell you that I'm a believer in education, and it's not that I have particularly, my viewpoint, I think, is complex and nuanced. It's not, I believe in this and that other side is bad. I think there are important correctives that we need to hear about. But that's the really exciting point about academic inquiry, where you get into those true debates and you're able to. But to simply say, oh, no, you all believe in one thing and therefore we're going to mandate, I think the government has no place mandating those kinds of things. It's different from saying, we want to make sure this standard that every fourth grader should learn to read, that by this level, this is the standard we would like to expect in mathematics. Yeah. That, I think, is the governmental, whether state or local or federal, I think that's all right. But I think to decide what should be taught, who should be hired, what the structuring of those institutions are, I think the government is out of line. And here I take much more a libertarian view, which is, why are you messing in areas that actually you are not experts in? And that was really stunning to me.
I think they bought their way in, unfortunately. There's just this insidious... the largest universities have really become big business. And that makes it much more difficult to focus on what the original or what the intent used to be in the deep history, which continued this liberal arts idea where we're teaching for the sake of teaching, and there isn't a job objective at the end of it. And I think coinciding with this maybe a generation ago, when it became when there was a belief among people in this country that you needed to go to college to get a good job, that coincided with this shift in the objective, like we're going to prepare kids to get jobs, and that's a drift away from the strict liberal arts. Now, obviously, there are other university educations besides just liberal arts objective, but so there are, and each university has now really shifted, where the money comes from, starts shifting what the objective is, and I think all of that it's gotten so big that it's very difficult. They all go different ways, but it's also very difficult to corral.
Right. I think we should look at the impact of universities, that they are sprawling and big, many of them, absolutely true, but there are many that aren't. There's also a distinction between public universities that are largely research universities and smaller colleges and liberal arts universities, and they're very different. Yes. But again, what we want, just as city planners no longer plant one kind of tree, we've realized we don't want simply the sort of flowering pear trees, because it's a problem to have monocultures. Similarly, the American way is about diversity. It's about different kinds of institutions flourishing. And we want Queens College, this wonderful community college in New York, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the country for what it does, to thrive. We also want Harvard to thrive. We want BYU, Brigham Young University, to thrive. We want small colleges like Wheaton College or Mount Holyoke to thrive. It's in everybody's best interest.
Absolutely.
But I think, and the reality is, there are plenty of spaces for all those who want to go to those institutions. I do think affordability and accessibility is an issue with institutions. And in part, it's because we've become so gigantic in terms of administration. It has to do with healthcare. It has to do with legal liability. It has to do with computer resources and technology. Those things have really swelled the ranks. It's not academic faculty that have increased so much. It's those other administrative functions.
That's true.
And perhaps AI has a way to help us reduce that, which would be wonderful. Though again, those are people who are employable. And one of the questions we have to is, what is the next generation of jobs look like? So there are many unknowns, but all of this makes me feel as if only universities can stay the course without, and I think they're all trying to strategize about how to fulfill their mission. And I know there's a great deal of negative press about them, and we can all find egregious examples of everything. And I'm not saying there aren't egregious examples, but the reality is the bulk of institutions and the bulk of the work done in those institutions is phenomenal.
Yeah. Meera, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm so glad to hear of your successes, and I wish you the best in future successes.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's been a delight to talk with you. And also, I'm feeling energized by the very process of articulating these ideas and ready to do battle some more.
Terrific.
Hey, if you like this clip, please hit the subscribe button. You might also want to check out some of the clips I've posted with my many other guests. My interviews all address the simple question, how screwed are we? We ask experts about the problems that make Americans so pessimistic today, but we also explore why there's never been a better time to have been born than today. Join us for perspective on today's challenges and opportunities.